This week, we welcome Jeff Capone, CEO and co-founder at SecureCircle, to discuss where's your data? Who cares? In the leadership and communications section, your title doesn't make you a leader. The new 9 to 5, how traditional hours are holding your business back. Building a better workplace starts with saying thanks and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Arduous legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter and compete in today's business climate. CyberSaint ingests data from your existing tech stack to deliver unprecedented, patented automation and visibility into enterprise risk and compliance. Don't get left behind. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs and business leaders of Fortune 500 and more partner with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaintBSW. As a security leader, CyberA for Teams was built to make your job easier. Are you struggling to measure your team's skills proficiency, provide critical or relevant role-based training, or translate training investments into meaningful business outcomes? CyberA for Teams is the industry's #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberA. CyberA for Teams. Skills development solved. Visit cybera.it/solved to solve your training problems. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 198, recorded November 30th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here quarantining in Colorado. Yes, I made it home safely from Mexico, but I'm staying locked in just to keep everybody else safe. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island are my co-hosts, Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
I'm free.
You're free. Welcome to Security Weekly, where our hosts get tested.
Yeah, more often
Quarantine, lockdown, whatever.
Quarantine, lockdown, tested, whatever.
At least Jason's free and clear. I'm just going to stick around for a little while at home. In our upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you will learn how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program, how to prevent phishing scams, and how to move beyond vulnerability scan to vulnerability fix. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view all of our previously recorded webcasts. Scythe is offering a free Purple Team workshop where attendees get hands-on in an isolated enterprise environment for 3 hours. It is scheduled for December 9th, the day before Security Weekly Unlocked. Register for this free workshop now by visiting securityweekly.com/Purple Team SW. It was much easier to say that than the bit.ly link that they gave me. This segment is sponsored by SecureCircle. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/SecureCircle. Joining us is Jeff Capone. He is the CEO and co-founder of SecureCircle, an award-winning executive leader with expertise in cybersecurity, enterprise software development, network and storage solutions, and IoT applications. Jeff has a track record of founding and selling successful software companies. Prior to SecureCircle, Jeff served as CTO at Netgear and CEO and co-founder of Leaf Networks, which was acquired by Netgear. Jeff was an assistant professor at Arizona State University and director of the Network Engineering and Wireless Telecom Laboratory. Jeff holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Northwestern University. Jeff, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, no worries. We want to talk data. I want to set this up. I've said this a few times on a number of shows. People kind of know my stance. My security triad: application, user, and data. These things are going to transcend regardless of what happens with digital transformation, moving to the cloud, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. I have to own application, user, and data security. But we know that data security is where it's at. But we haven't seen a lot of innovation in the data security space until recently. And I want to start with why not a lot of innovation? If data was always the thing to protect, why has it taken us so long to figure this out?
Yeah, no, I think because the focus has always been on the network or the device and the user, right? Not the data itself. But I think really what it comes down to, you got to think about where your data is and the data that matters, and then try to find ways to keep the data inherently protected. That's what we do at SecureCircle. But really, when it comes down to discovering the data, what you said, it's really about the applications. I think a lot of people get tripped up when thinking about how to implement a DLP program with thinking about all the sins of the past, right? I mean, one of the things that we know is that stuff tends to get disordered over time. And the other rule that I always go by is things get disordered over time, and people are lazy, right? I'll go and put it in the right place at a later point in time, or I'll go and update this, and I'll make a note to myself to go encrypt this or protect that. It just doesn't happen, right? So systems tend to become disorderly over time. And maybe that's because people are lazy, I guess. So
well, also,
trying to
Jeff,
find ways that,
I'm sorry. I think you bring up a really good point, because not only maybe we've gotten lazy, but also I think we put trust in other protections that don't actually help us secure the data. We've got a secure email gateway, and we've got an endpoint agent, and we've got user awareness training, and we've got DLP, and none of those really, I think, help you protect the data. They're protecting maybe from other things. They're not actually protecting the data, which is why I love your solution, because it actually protects the data.
It's a combination of a couple of things, right? I mean, number one, we're having a hard enough time classifying our hardware and software assets, never mind our data assets, right? I mean, it takes bandwidth, it takes time. People are so stuck in their daily whirlwind, and they're putting this false trust in the technologies as well. So we're not putting the time it takes in to actually go through all of our data sets, classify them, and know it. I mean, we say it all the time, know what you have. But our minds go right to asset, like hardware assets and software assets. They don't go to data points. So think about how large of a project it would be to classify all of your data, not only in a database, but unstructured data as well. That's a monolithic task.
Yep.
That's huge.
Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I got excited.
I think it's spot on. I think historically people have always said, okay, let's focus on structured and then unstructured data. And when it comes to the structured data, it really only becomes a problem if it ends up leaving, right? That's where you'll have a breach. And of course, there's malicious insiders and there's malicious outsiders who can come and exfiltrate that data. And there's all sorts of ways to try to make sure while that data is in that silo that it's protected, and try to make sure it doesn't get egress to the wrong parties and only egress to the right parties. But even if it gets egress to the right parties, you still need to maintain control over that data, because that's eventually where the sloppiness happens, right? The sloppiness happens because people take data out, they don't realize the value of the data, and they won't extend the right protection of the data that is now in their possession that was when it was in the system of record that they took it out of. And because of that, you got to take people out of the process. You got to make things transparent. You got to make things autonomous. Just things should happen. People should not be involved in a company's data protection strategy. I think that's one of the biggest flaws that a lot of organizations have gone through, that they rely on people to do the right thing. And as you know, back to the people who just want to get their job done and want to go home, right? They're not thinking about, they're not the custodians of the data, right? They just want to get their job done. So sort of getting back to where's your data, who cares? That's all a matter of perspective, right? And who cares about what? Who cares about a breach? Who cares about getting the right information to the right person at the right time, right? So if a piece of data to me, it might have a different perspective than somebody that's trying to lock it down and make sure it doesn't get breached. But to me, I need to get that data to a customer so that they can, say, approve a PO or what happens to be. But so I think it's always interesting when you think about, classifying and protecting data. How do you automatically do this so you're not relying on users to make the decisions? Because to some users, one decision might be the right decision, and to other folks, that same decision might be the wrong decision. So there's really has to be automated ways that the data is always protected. But sort of just dialing back to structured versus unstructured, I think the world has the structured data or applications when they're in these services, SaaS or cloud applications, fairly well buttoned up. We know how to control the identity of users. We can do conditional access on that. We know how to make sure the device hopefully doesn't have any malware on it before we give it access. We know how to revoke access to those systems. But inevitably, it's when the data leaves those systems, and it is really in an organized form when it's in those systems. It's only when it becomes unstructured, unorganized, is when we really have to think about what we're doing, how we're involving users, and how we can try to not involve users, but still let people be productive and not really have to think about security.
And the Nirvana use case, which I've always talked about for years, is that if I have the right protections in place on the data, it doesn't matter where it is because you don't have access to it. So how do you accomplish that, Jeff? Because saying that has been easier said than done. Just protect everything, and therefore it doesn't matter if it falls into the hacker's hand or if it's on the dark web, because they won't be able to access it because they don't have the encryption keys to gain access to it. But how do you actually do that?
Sure. Again, just a second, but just to take a step back, like just to ask yourself a fundamental question. We think about structured and unstructured, but if your if nobody ever accessed the structured repositories with a device, nobody ever accessed it, is the data at risk? Clearly not. It's only when it gets accessed is it at risk. And it's only once it moves is really when the risk comes into play. So what we do is a lot of technologies out there will encrypt the file, right? We don't encrypt the file. If you want to think of it, we encrypt the bytes inside the file. So the name of the file doesn't change. The way applications work with those files are the same, provided the applications are what we call trusted. And you can trust any application. And what that means is those applications can read those bytes that now are encrypted inside the file, just like they would read the bytes that were not encrypted, but yet still inside the file, and they would know no different. You do have to push out an agent to those endpoints, but once you put the agents out to those endpoints and you've controlled access to that front door for accessing the data, and part of that control is making sure SecureCircle is installed, the data that comes out, automatically you'll encrypt those bytes on the fly inside the data that's egressing and not impact what happens on the endpoint. So you truly can extend all that control you had, when it was structured inside those well-controlled systems, to when it becomes unstructured into these sort of wild, wild west, if you will.
Yeah,
Right.
I love that. And, for CISOs listening, what Jeff is describing is manipulation. I don't know the best way to describe it. I feel like I get it wrong, but it has to do with the file system rather than the file.
Yeah.
And so
Correct.
Before, we would take something like PGP, and I would encrypt a file, and that was really super hard. And even me and my nerdy friends would mess up, and then we'd be like, oh, wait, that was with a key, and then I forgot the passphrase or like whatever, right? And there was a ton of issues with that. This solution is at the file system level, so it's completely transparent to the user, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
Which the security follows the file no matter where it's at the end of the day.
That's right. I mean,
Exactly.
If you really think what a file is just meta information pointing to block storage on a piece of media. So if you have the ability to control that meta information, it doesn't matter where those blocks are. It doesn't matter if those blocks are encrypted or not encrypted. And if you are able to control that meta plane, which is what we do, then you're able to control access to the data, whether it's local, but the control to that meta plane is centrally controlled. So technically, you get all the benefits of accessing local storage with all the control as if these things were links. So, I mean, think of every file as almost being a symbolic link, but it points to blocks that are locally stored, but yet you have centralized control over how those blocks are retrieved.
It puts me at ease when I think about your users and your SaaS services and local file storage, and it can keep you up at night. Like, where's my data going? And if someone were to access it, it could be a really bad day. It really sets my mind at ease that you can protect it in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we talked about in a few other episodes too is the sort of litmus test I like to talk about is source code. If you can protect source code as it's leaving in this manner, yet not impact what tools developers can use, not impact what build processes they use, then I think you've truly established that this is a way to truly extend without inhibiting, because I think developers tend to be the most sensitive to any security obstacles put in place that can impact their ability to do their job. So if you're able to protect data, persistently protect data, without impacting folks like developers from writing code and how they write control, how they do local builds, how they check in, how they check out, then you've won, right? So if you can do it for developers, you can do it for source code, then all other data that leaves these central repositories is essentially trivial.
Yeah, and you're also removing that factor of the human element on executing on your security policy as well,
Yes.
like we talked about earlier, right? That's the biggest piece, is you don't want the end user to have to execute.
Yeah, so one of the things, I mean, if you just dial back to DLP, traditional DLP, it's all about managing, security in general is about managing an exception list, but typically in most modern security postures, the exception list you're managing is what to allow. If you think about just a firewall, you're managing not an application firewall, just a traditional firewall. You're managing what sites your people are allowed to go to. You're not blocking sites anymore like you used to do 20 years ago, or maybe even more at this point. But data protection has always been what to block. Oh, I'm going to take an action at the device level. I'm going to take an action to block the data because it is sensitive before it moves to a USB drive. But if it was protected before it even moved to the USB drive, just let it go to the USB drive because the data is inherently protected. So a lot of those decisions, all those decisions get removed from the user perspective when you're inherently protecting the data in that way.
And I like that because if you leave it up to the user, that's a hard decision to put on them. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there was someone maybe protecting data that thought the travel plans for a nuclear scientist in Iran, how sensitive was that? I'm not sure. Let's just protect everything just in case.
Right. It doesn't hurt, right? And the question is, it's always this usability versus security. And one of the things we've always tried to do is try to make things as transparent as possible. So when we were first starting the company, I looked at the spectrum of companies in their position on security. And if you look at the DoD, for example, the Department of Defense, or any of these top higher classified government agencies, they're going to err on the side of security, not usability. And then if you think of sort of more retail-oriented companies, some of the companies that I've worked for in the past, they're going to err on the side of usability. I don't want to protect a data sheet because you know what? I need to get that to customers as soon as possible. I don't have to worry about unprotecting it. So when we were first looking at the market opportunity for SecureCircle and figuring out what we're selling to whom, the DoD, we'd be selling them convenience without sacrificing security. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, for companies that were all about convenience, we'd be selling them security with no impact to convenience. So at the lower end, we're selling security. At the higher end, we're selling convenience. So it's really two ends of the spectrum. And if you have something that can truly be secure and transparent, then you can address both. You can talk to the government companies how that they're actually protecting data. They can still protect in the same way, but offer their end users a lot more convenience. And then at the lower end, where, when I should say lower, but on the other end of the security spectrum, where people don't want to give up any convenience in order to gain security, you can start selling them security and say you're not going to have to give up any convenience.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, humans are gonna react to the what's in it for me type scenario, right? They're gonna look at a situation and say, what's going to get me in the best light, the best end result for me personally. And the motivation may be convenience because my boss wants us out the door as fast as possible, or the motivation may be if I put this out the door as fast as possible, I could get fired, right? So humans are going to think in that nature. That's right. That's right.
Who, with respect to whose viewpoint how valuable is convenience versus security on that whole spectrum of things, right? So, really getting back to just the automation and making sure that, those decisions you aren't relying on users for security decisions. Right?
That's a beautiful thing.
Maybe it's okay to rely on them.
But that's a beautiful thing when you can take that variable out of the picture. They don't have to even worry about making that decision, right? Because, you take it out of the picture, you control it centrally. I love it. It's absolutely great. Because that's where a lot of problems come into play. That's where the human factor comes into play, and a lot of problems come into play because you have an end user who's not a security professional, who's looking to just do their job and get their job done, right? And sometimes they make bad decisions.
Right. I mean, one of the other ways to look at it is if everybody lived their life in a web browser, never had an endpoint with any storage, didn't download anything, and you lived your life in a web browser, every application in the world would operate in a web browser. Data would never need to leave the data center. It would always be in the data center. I mean, you can do that also with VDI. But that's not practical, right? I mean, we can't set up a VDI session for every single person that needs to access data, right? Any data, right? We can't force everybody to live in a web browser because there's definitely applications people need to use that aren't available in the web, and then they need to combine data, massage data. Data has this natural life cycle, so inevitably data has to leave these applications and these services. But really, if you lock down people to putting them in the data center, so to speak, put the person in the data center, do it virtually or do it by locking out a web browser, that's a way you could get full control of your data and it would never egress the data center. But again, the way we like to look at it is just extend those same controls to the data so that literally you have all the benefits as if you were using VDI, if you were locking files down to just being links. And managing control centrally to the access, regardless of where that data goes. Effectively, you're putting those people, at least the control, back into the data center, even though the bytes, which are encrypted, have egressed it out.
What I think is interesting about how you manage this solution is it takes my triad and implements it. It's data, which applications can use that data based on user information, right? So what I love about this is it brings all three of those home, Jeff, in a way that is really easy to understand. This user is allowed to access that data, but also only for these applications so that, you can't kind of bypass the system. And that's a unique approach where you look at the traditional data loss prevention tools. They're trying to watch the data on the wire as it goes by, right? And there's not much user or application context in that example. Where here you have all that contextual information and you're actually enforcing it across those three domains.
Yeah, and actually one of the things you can also do, I mean, you think about conditional access, right? So typically you think about conditional access applying to applications or services, but with SecureCircle, even after the data leaves, it might have been okay for them to have access today, but you could apply conditional access rules to even the data that's left these services, not just the services themselves. So for example, if somebody, they were allowed to access data and they were in the United States, they downloaded it to their endpoint, but now they moved that endpoint to another country. So your conditional access policies could kick in and you could say, well, I don't want them to access that data anymore locally. So not only they don't want someone to access the data that's in a application or service that is in the US while someone's outside of the US, even the data that they took out of those applications is now on their endpoint and they think they have local access to it. They still don't have control of the data because you could control based upon your policies for conditional access, even what happens to the data even after it's left those services. Oh. So you can mirror that conditional access on these applications and SaaS services down to the data that is now on the endpoints.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, use cases I start thinking about is contractors. You have contractors who come in for 3 months, do some work for you, and then you can shut down access after their time is done, right? And then you never have to worry about them having your data on their endpoint.
And it's very relevant with source code. So we have a lot of customers that are using it for for the developers, but more importantly, for the contractors that they bring onto these projects that are overseas. Yep. And they want to make sure that, it's not only just taking the code, but it's also sharing the code what's the word I'm looking for here? Repurposing the code in an unimproved fashion between projects, right? So you can think about if you had source code, you have a contractor using it, maybe they inadvertently, use some of that source code on another project that they're doing. And clearly that's the company's intellectual property and wouldn't want that to happen. So if you actually lock the source code down this way, a lot of that unintentional sharing is not possible either. So that's something else that you want to consider when thinking about securing source code.
And Jason, when you think about it from a data security policy perspective, the ability to actually enforce that policy is kind of a game changer, right?
Totally, 100%. I mean,
you've got this. Yeah.
At the end of the day, you still have to bring in the business units to help you build the policy, right? Because us as security professionals aren't always going to know exactly what intellectual property is and what we need to protect, right? So, but to be able to engage the business unit leaders and say, all right, help me classify these subsets of data, but then not have to worry about execution at the staff level, that's a total game changer, right? Because now you're building policy, enforcing policy all the way down to the end user, the endpoint, the data, the application, and then marrying that to the identity, and you're making sure that you can protect it that way. And hey, by the way, I can geo-block, I can time bomb, I can do all these other things that I need to do to protect my data. For all of these, it's always the gray area that gets you in trouble, right? Like the contractors, the temp employees, that's what gets you in trouble a lot, because in many instances, you can take your traditional staff and build some really good policy around it. Granted, a lot of times they have to execute at the user level, but that gray area is what kills you a lot, right? Where you have these contractors, these temp-based employees, third party. You're going to have third parties who are partners accessing your data. If you can control that, right, with geo-blocking, if you control it with time bombing and basically saying, I have this person coming in for 30 days, they're only going to have access for 30 days, and then we're pulling it. That is a total game changer. Total game changer.
And you get to centralize all that control in one place.
Yep. Yeah. And not have to worry about the human element. Not burden. Honestly, from my perspective, not burden the human element with that. Right? They have a job to do. They're not security professionals. Right? Yes, it's a shared responsibility, but the more we can take that burden away from the end user, the better off we are.
Right. Yeah. And the question is, though, you're always going to have to get users to make some sort of decisions. But the question is, what is that decision? So one of the things that I like to talk about is, would you rather have users make decisions on what's important or what's unimportant? So if you could protect by default and give everybody in your organization the rights to unprotect unimportant data, if they start to unprotect important data, then you automatically have an audit trail of that, right? So from a security perspective, since unprotecting unimportant data would be more in line with someone getting their job done, that's a security decision that they will execute, right? The question though is, how much of an inconvenience is that to ask somebody in the company to unprotect that data spec sheet before sending it to a potential customer? I think that's acceptable. I mean, I really do think it's acceptable, especially in these days, and the work from home trend that is, obviously highly accelerated now with the whole situation we have at hand. So asking users to unprotect unimportant stuff, it forces their hand, because they'll have to do that to get their job done. But asking them to protect the important stuff or make them take that decision, they're probably not going to do it because it's not in line with them getting their job done.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the user experience, right? Because the other side of the pressure that CISOs are getting is we have to implement these policies, but bring the least amount of friction possible to the business, right? And that's what CEOs are telling us. Listen, you can't bring too much friction to the business, because now more than ever, organizations need to have a great experience with our company, a quick experience, an expedient experience. So if you can take this automation, you can make the end user experience great, it's a win all the way around.
Right. Yeah. I mean, simplicity and user experience. I don't care whether you're building enterprise products, cybersecurity products, retail products, people are people. And it always comes down to that. You need things to be simple and really user friendly, right? Yeah. So, I mean, those are the secret ingredients.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have one squeaky wheel with a $3 million deal in the pipeline, yelling about the experience, you're in trouble from a security perspective.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, in selling security products, there's so many different stakeholders you need to appease, right? I mean, it's sometimes the security team doesn't fall under IT, and they'll make a product recommendation and throw it over the fence to the IT team for implementation, and then you have to go through the whole exercise of convincing the IT team why this was the right decision, right? And so you need to think about how well does this deploy, how easy it is for them to deploy, right? So, because they're going to have to go push it out with whatever MDM tool they're using. Does it work with those tools, right? So, even making it useful for the quote unquote end user, you got to constantly think of who your end user is. Sometimes it's truly productivity users, but other times it's IT, right?
Oh, 100%.
Those are all stakeholders, and you need to really make sure you reduce the friction across the board to even the IT folks as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely changed the model from a data security perspective. So, Jeff, I'd like to thank you for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Oh, it's always my pleasure.
To learn more about protecting all of your data so you don't have to worry about where it is, please visit securityweekly.com/SecureCircle. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.